What if the Hollywood legend you admired was hiding a dark secret? Marlon Brando, famous for his incredible acting, had a troubled past that almost ruined his career. In this video, we're unveiling the shocking moments that Hollywood never wanted you to see. How did a troubled childhood shape his tumultuous career? What truths lie behind his legendary roles and erratic behavior? But first, let's start at the beginning. Marlon Brando Jr. was born on April 3, 1924, in the heartland of America, Omaha, Nebraska. He was the only son in the family, growing up alongside two older sisters. His dad, Marlon Brando Sr., was a traveling salesman, always on the road, while his mom, Dorothy, chased her dreams as a stage actress, leaving little Marlon feeling lost and lonely. With his mom often absent, young Marlon grew attached to the family's housekeeper. But when she left to get married, it hit him hard. This early experience of abandonment left a lasting mark on him, shaping his relationships and his outlook on life. Despite the emotional roller coaster at home, Brando's childhood wasn't all doom and gloom. He had a knack for making people laugh, even if it meant playing a few pranks on them. In 1930, the family moved to Evanston, Illinois, where Marlon met his best friend, Wally Cox. Their bond was unbreakable, lasting until Cox's untimely death years later. But trouble was brewing in the Brando household. In 1936, Marlon's parents separated, forcing him and his siblings to move with their mom to California. They eventually reconciled, but the family dynamics remained strained. Despite his family's diverse European roots, including German, Dutch, English, and Irish ancestry, Brando felt a deep connection to his Irish heritage. During a visit to Ireland in 1995, he was overwhelmed with emotion and even considered becoming an Irish citizen. Back in the States, Brando attended Libertyville High School, where he excelled at sports and drama. But academics weren't his strong suit, and after a few rebellious stunts, including riding his motorcycle through the school hallways, he was expelled in 1941. Little did he know that this expulsion would be the catalyst for his journey towards Hollywood stardom. Brando's rebellious spirit landed him in hot water again when his father shipped him off to Shattuck Military Academy, the same school where dear old Dad had studied. Marlon surprised everyone by excelling in acting, but his defiant nature never went away. In 1943, he got in trouble for disobeying an officer during a military exercise. He was confined to campus, but that didn't stop him from sneaking into town. When he was caught, the school faculty voted to kick him out. But his classmates had his back, thinking the punishment was too harsh, and Brando was invited back the next year. However, he decided to ditch school altogether. With no diploma and no prospects, Brando took a summer job digging ditches, thanks to his father's connections. He even tried to join the army, but a lingering football injury from his school days kept him out. Following his sister's lead, Brando moved to New York City to pursue acting. He enrolled at the American Theater Wing Professional School, where he learned from the renowned director, Erwin Piscator. It was a decision that would change his life, as he found a place where he was accepted and appreciated for his unique talents. Brando was a star student, especially when it came to the teachings of Stella Adler. She taught him the Stanislavski system, a method that encouraged actors to really understand their characters inside and out. Brando had a natural gift for this, and he quickly became known for his intense and realistic performances. While many considered Brando a method actor, he didn't agree. He actually hated the teachings of Lee Strasberg, another famous acting teacher. Brando thought Strasberg was a self-centered guy who took credit for other people's achievements. He only went to Strasberg's actor studio on Saturdays for the fun exercises and to mingle with the pretty girls. Brando's unique approach to acting involved chatting with the crew and other actors right up until the camera started rolling. This way, he could deliver his lines as naturally as possible, just like he was having a casual conversation. This innovative technique would revolutionize acting, but some critics initially thought it was just Brando being difficult. Brando's early acting days were a wild ride. He used his intense acting skills in summer stock theater, but his unpredictable behavior got him kicked out of one production. Still, he was quickly discovered and landed a role on Broadway in the play I Remember Mama in 1944. He even auditioned for a part in a play with the famous Luntz, but his nonchalant attitude and refusal to read his lines got him rejected. Despite this setback, Brando's talent shone through. He was named Most Promising Young Actor for his role in Truckline Cafe, even though the play itself wasn't a hit. He continued to land roles on Broadway, even turning down a big part in Eugene O'Neill's The Iceman Cometh because he found the script boring. In 1945, he starred in a play called The Eagle Has Two Heads with the legendary Tallulah Bankhead. It was a clash of titans, as Bankhead hated the new, method acting style that Brando was known for. They fought like cats and dogs during rehearsals, with Bankhead even comparing Brando to his alcoholic mother. The producer, Jack Wilson, put up with Brando's antics for a while, but he finally snapped when Brando mumbled his lines during a dress rehearsal. Wilson yelled at Brando, telling him to forget about his acting method and just tell him what he was going to do. Brando responded by unleashing his full acting power, leaving everyone in awe. He later joked that people only thought you could act if you could yell. This experience taught Brando a valuable lesson about the importance of balancing his natural talent with professionalism. The critics weren't as kind to Brando's Broadway performance as his fellow actors were. One even compared his drawn-out death scene to a car trying to park in busy Manhattan. Ouch. While some reviews improved as the tour went on, it was clear that Brando hadn't fully tapped into his potential yet. But Brando's wild side didn't stay backstage. He started acting up during the show, doing things like scratching himself and picking his nose, just to mess with Tallulah Bankhead. It was a childish prank, but it pushed Bankhead over the edge, and she eventually fired him. Getting fired turned out to be a lucky break for Brando. It opened the door for him to play the role that would make him a star, Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire. Interestingly, Bankhead, who had turned down the role of Blanche Dubois, actually recommended Brando for the part, calling him a total pig of a man. Talk about a backhanded compliment. Elia Kazan, the director, saw something special in Brando and cast him despite his lack of experience. Tennessee Williams, the playwright, was thrilled with the decision, saying Brando's reading was the best he'd ever heard. To prepare for the role, Brando studied a real-life boxer named Rocky Graziano at a local gym. When Graziano saw the play, he was shocked to see Brando playing a character based on him. It's safe to say that Brando's unconventional methods paid off, as his performance in A Streetcar Named Desire catapulted him to stardom and forever changed the landscape of acting. In 1947, Brando dipped his toes into the film world with a screen test for an early version of Rebel Without a Cause. While that movie didn't come to fruition until later, it wasn't long before he landed his first film role. He played a bitter war veteran with paralysis in the 1950 film The Men. To nail the part, Brando spent a month living in a hospital bed to truly understand his character's struggles. Critics were blown away by his performance, calling it vividly real, dynamic, and sensitive. His ability to convey raw emotion and depth was undeniable. Interestingly, Brando believed that this role might have actually changed his draft status from unfit to eligible for military service. His portrayal of a wounded soldier was so convincing that the Army reconsidered his knee injury. But Brando, being Brando, managed to dodge the draft by claiming to be a psychoneurotic with authority issues. Early on, Brando developed a unique acting technique, using cue cards instead of memorizing his lines. This was unheard of at the time, and some directors weren't happy about it. But Brando insisted that it made his performances more natural and spontaneous. He wanted his characters to feel like real people, not just actors reciting lines. He famously said, If you don't know what the words are, but you have a general idea, then you look at the cue card and it gives you the feeling to the viewer, hopefully, that the person is really searching for what he is going to say, that he doesn't know what to say. But not everyone bought his explanation. Some people thought he was just lazy or couldn't remember his lines. Once, on the set of The Godfather, when asked why he needed cue cards, he simply replied, "Because I can read them that way." In 1951, Brando brought his iconic Stanley Kowalski to the big screen in the film adaptation of A Streetcar Named Desire. This steamy and intense performance earned him his first Oscar nomination for Best Actor, and it's still considered one of his greatest roles. But Brando didn't rest on his laurels. The very next year, he was nominated again for his portrayal of the Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata in Viva Zapata. Brando was a stickler for authenticity, so he secretly traveled to Zapata's hometown in Mexico to study the locals' speech, behavior, and movements. This dedication to his craft paid off, as critics were once again blown away by his performance. However, the filming of Viva Zapata wasn't without its drama. Brando's co-star, Anthony Quinn, played his on-screen brother, but their relationship was frosty to say the least. Brando sensed a bitterness from Quinn, who had previously taken over Brando's role as Stanley Kowalski on Broadway. Years later, Brando learned the truth. Director Elia Kazan had intentionally created tension between the two actors by telling Quinn that Brando was unimpressed with his work. It was a sneaky move by Kazan, but it definitely achieved the desired effect on screen. Despite the behind-the-scenes drama, Brando's performance in Viva Zapata was another triumph. He was on a roll, proving time and time again that he was a force to be reckoned with in Hollywood. Brando's next movie, Julius Caesar, 1953, was a big hit with critics. He played Mark Antony, and even though some people thought his mumbling style was a bit weird, his performance was undeniably powerful. He really nailed the famous "Friends, Romans, Countrymen" speech, so much so that the renowned British actor John Gielgud, who starred alongside him, was super impressed. Gielgud even offered Brando a whole season at his theater in London, but Brando turned him down. In his autobiography, Brando would later say that playing Mark Antony was asinine, but his biographer, Stefan Kanfer, called that comment just another example of Brando putting himself down. In reality, Brando's performance was scorching hot. After seeing the movie, director John Huston said it was like a furnace door opening because of the sheer intensity radiating from Brando on screen. But while making Julius Caesar, Brando learned a shocking secret about his mentor, Elia Kazan. Kazan had spilled the beans to the government, ratting out a bunch of people suspected of being communists during the Red Scare. Brando was hurt and angry, but he still chose to work with Kazan again in On the Waterfront, proving that their bond was stronger than any political disagreement. After all, as Brando said, none of us is perfect. In 1953, Brando took on the role of Johnny Strabler, the rebellious leader of a motorcycle gang in The Wild One. He even got to ride his own cool Triumph Thunderbird 6T motorcycle in the film. But not everyone was happy about this bad boy image. Motorcycle companies didn't like the negative portrayal of their brand, and critics slammed the movie for its violence. One magazine even said it was like a shot of adrenaline for the audience. Brando didn't always see eye to eye with the director, Laszlo Benedek, and he didn't get along with his co-star Lee Marvin either. But what really surprised Brando was how much the movie resonated with young people. His leather jacket and motorcycle became symbols of teenage rebellion, making him a role model for the up-and-coming rock and roll generation and future stars like James Dean and Elvis Presley. After the movie came out, leather jackets and motorcycles were flying off the shelves. Years later, Brando admitted the movie hadn't aged well, but he still felt connected to his character, Johnny. He said, "There's a line in the picture where he snarls, 'Nobody tells me what to do.' That's exactly how I've felt all my life. In a lighter turn of events, Brando co-starred with fellow actor William Redfield in a summer stock production of the play Arms and the Man. It was a different kind of role for Brando, a comedic one, showing his versatility as an actor. In 1954, Brando starred in On the Waterfront, a gritty drama about corruption and violence on the docks. The film was directed by Elia Kazan, the same guy who had snitched on his fellow actors during the Red Scare. Brando was still hurt by Kazan's betrayal, so he initially turned down the role of Terry Malloy. The part almost went to Frank Sinatra, who was a perfect fit since he grew up in Hoboken, where the movie was set. But luckily for us, the producers managed to convince Brando to take the role. Brando's performance as Terry Malloy, a conflicted dock worker, was simply stunning. He had incredible chemistry with his co-star, Eva Marie Saint, and Kazan's direction brought out the best in him. One of the most memorable scenes is when Terry laments his wasted potential, saying, "I could have been a contender." Brando actually changed the scene from the original script. He felt it wasn't realistic for Terry to be held at gunpoint by his brother while delivering such a powerful speech. So they changed it to Terry gently pushing the gun away, making the scene even more emotionally charged. Critics went wild for Brando's performance, calling it a masterpiece. And guess what? He finally won his first Oscar for Best Actor. It was a well-deserved victory and a testament to his incredible talent. In On the Waterfront, Kazan gave Brando the freedom to improvise, and it paid off big time. Kazan was in awe of Brando's natural instincts, saying that he was amazed by the contrast between Brando's tough guy exterior and his gentle, delicate demeanor. He even asked, what other actor, when faced with a gun, would push it away with the tenderness of a caress? Brando's performance was so nuanced and emotionally charged that Kazan couldn't imagine anyone else doing it better. The film was a smash hit, earning rave reviews and raking in millions at the box office. Critics called it a masterpiece, praising its raw power and emotional depth. Even the famous film critic Roger Ebert said that Brando and Kazan changed the way acting was done in American movies. But true to his humble nature, Brando wasn't impressed with his own performance. He even walked out of the screening room, thinking he was a huge failure. But the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences disagreed, and Brando finally won his first Oscar for Best Actor. It was a well-deserved victory, but the story didn't end there. The Oscar statue was stolen shortly after Brando received it. It eventually turned up years later at a London auction house, which contacted Brando to let him know. It was a bizarre twist to an already incredible story, proving that even Oscar statues aren't immune to a little drama. In 1955, Brando tried his hand at singing and dancing in the film adaptation of the musical Guys and Dolls. It was a gamble that didn't quite pay off. Critics weren't too impressed with his singing, describing it as far away and sometimes a bit off-key. Brando himself admitted his singing was pretty terrible, and later joked that they had to piece together countless takes to make it sound decent. He even quipped that he almost choked trying to lip-sync to one of the songs. But the drama didn't stop there. Brando and his co-star Frank Sinatra didn't exactly hit it off. They were polar opposites. Brando loved taking his time with multiple takes, while Sinatra preferred to nail it in one shot. Their feud was the talk of the town, with Sinatra even calling Brando the world's most overrated actor. Despite the behind-the-scenes drama and mixed reviews, Guys and Dolls still managed to make a decent profit at the box office. But it would be the last time Brando ventured into the world of musicals. Next, Brando took on the role of Sakini, a Japanese interpreter for the U.S. Army in post-war Japan, in the 1956 film The Tea House of the August Moon. To prepare, Brando lost weight and adopted a quirky accent for the role. However, some critics weren't thrilled with his performance, finding it a bit too silly and not showcasing his true acting strengths. But even with a few missteps, Brando's career was far from over. he continued to take on challenging roles and push the boundaries of acting, leaving his mark on Hollywood history. In 1957, Brando soared as a U.S. Air Force officer in the movie Sayonara. It was a love story set against the backdrop of the Korean War, and even though some critics thought the plot was a bit dull, the film was a big hit at the box office. Brando's manager negotiated a sweet deal for him, getting him 10% of the film's earnings. That turned Brando into a millionaire overnight. The movie also tackled the touchy subject of interracial marriage, which caused a bit of controversy back then. But Brando wasn't just interested in fame and fortune. He wanted to make movies that mattered, movies that could make the world a better place. So he teamed up with Paramount Studios to start his own production company called Pennebaker, named after his beloved mother who had passed away a few years earlier. Her death hit Brando hard, and some say he lost his spark after that. He even put his dad in charge of the company, but it seemed more like a way to get back at his old man than a genuine business partnership. In 1958, Brando took on the role of a German soldier in The Young Lions. He even dyed his hair blonde and tried to speak with a German accent, but even he admitted it wasn't very convincing. The movie was based on a book that portrayed all Germans as evil, but Brando disagreed. He wanted to show that even bad people can be misled and that there's good in everyone. This led to a heated debate between Brando and the book's author, Irwin Shaw. They even had a televised interview where they argued about the nature of good and evil. Brando believed that actors have the power to create real, complex characters, not just simple stereotypes. The Young Lions also marked Brando's only film appearance with his friend and rival, Montgomery Clift. They didn't share any scenes together, but it was still a big deal for fans to see these two legends in the same movie. Brando closed out the decade with the movie The Fugitive Kind in 1960, starring opposite the fiery Anna Magnani. It was based on another Tennessee Williams play, but it didn't quite capture the same magic as A Streetcar Named Desire. Critics weren't too impressed, calling it a cornpone melodrama. But even with a few flops, Brando's star power was undeniable, and he was already a legend in his own right. In 1961, Brando decided to take the reins and direct his own movie, a Western called One-Eyed Jacks. The original director, Stanley Kubrick, got the boot early on, and Paramount handed the project over to Brando. It was a bold move, but it didn't exactly go smoothly. Brando, being Brando, loved to explore his character and shoot multiple takes, just like he did as an actor. But this time, he was the director, and his perfectionism caused the film to go way over budget. Paramount had expected a 3-month shoot, but it dragged on for 6 months and ended up costing twice as much as planned. Brando's lack of experience as an editor also caused delays, and eventually, Paramount had to step in and take control. Brando wasn't happy about it, claiming that the studio butchered his vision and made everyone in the film look bad. He walked away from the project, feeling defeated and disillusioned. Critics had mixed feelings about One-Eyed Jacks, but it wasn't exactly a hit. This whole ordeal left a bad taste in Brando's mouth, and his reputation for being difficult to work with grew even stronger. His next project, a remake of Mutiny on the Bounty, was an even bigger disaster. The filming took place in Tahiti, and Brando was accused of intentionally messing everything up. It was such a mess that a magazine even ran a story about it, calling it The Mutiny of Marlon Brando. The director, Louis Milestone, said the studio executives deserved what they got for giving a ham actor like Brando so much power. The movie was a huge financial loss for the studio, and Brando's reputation for being a troublemaker was solidified. Critics even started commenting on his weight fluctuations, adding insult to injury. It seemed like Brando's career was headed for a major meltdown. By the 1960s, Brando's career had taken a bit of a nosedive. He started taking on roles in movies that critics thought were beneath his talent, all because he needed the cash. He even signed a deal with Universal Studios for 5 films, which turned out to be a big mistake. Most of these movies flopped, and even Brando himself was disappointed with them. Only one film, The Ugly American, received some positive attention and even got Brando a Golden Globe nomination. But the rest, like Bedtime Story, The Appaloosa, A Countess from Hong Kong, and The Night of the Following Day, were critical and financial disasters. The biggest letdown for Brando was A Countess from Hong Kong, directed by Charlie Chaplin, a filmmaker he had always admired. But the experience was a total nightmare. Chaplin's bossy directing style and old-school methods clashed with Brando's more laid-back approach. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Brando later admitted that he made some of these movies purely for the money, calling this period of his life the "fuck you years." One movie in particular, called Candy, was considered the lowest point of his career. It was a silly sex comedy that critics hated, and it seemed like Brando was just going through the motions. The bad reviews really hurt Brando, even though he tried to act like he didn't care. In a documentary, he confessed that he was actually quite sensitive, and the criticism stung. But he put on a brave face and kept working, hoping to find his way back to the top. In 1967, Brando took on a daring role as a closeted gay army officer in Reflections in a Golden Eye. This movie, directed by the legendary John Huston and starring Elizabeth Taylor, was one of Brando's most praised performances in years. Critics were amazed by his ability to portray a man trapped by his circumstances and hiding his true self. The following year, Brando teamed up with director Arthur Penn for The Chase, a movie that tackled some heavy topics like racism, sexual revolution, small-town corruption, and vigilante justice. Brando shared the screen with Jane Fonda, Robert Redford, and Robert Duvall, making it a star-studded affair. But Brando's personal favorite film from this era was Burn, 1969, where he played a mysterious agent who helps a Caribbean island gain independence. He considered his performance in this film to be some of his best work, even though it wasn't a box office hit. Brando loved working with the director, Gillo Pontecorvo, so much that he dedicated an entire chapter to the film in his autobiography. He even admitted that they almost came to blows on set, showing just how passionate they were about the project. In 1971, Brando starred in a British horror film called The Nightcomers, directed by Michael Winner. It was a prequel to the classic ghost story The Turn of the Screw, and Brando's performance earned him a BAFTA nomination. But despite the critical acclaim, the movie bombed at the box office. Brando's career in the late 1960s and early 1970s was a mix of critical successes and commercial flops. He wasn't afraid to take on challenging roles and explore controversial themes, even if it meant risking his popularity. By the 1970s, Brando's career had cooled down considerably. Critics were less than impressed with his recent work, and he hadn't had a box office smash since The Young Lions back in 1958. But everything was about to change when Francis Ford Coppola offered him the role of a lifetime, Vito Corleone, the legendary Don in The Godfather. But landing the role wasn't a walk in the park. The studio bosses at Paramount were dead set against casting Brando. His reputation for being difficult on set and his string of recent flops made them nervous. They wanted someone more reliable and bankable. But Coppola wouldn't budge. He knew Brando was the perfect fit for the role, and he fought tooth and nail to convince the studio. It didn't help that Paramount's last Mafia movie, The Brotherhood, had been a total bomb. They were worried that another movie about the mob wouldn't do well, especially with a controversial actor like Brando at the helm. Coppola had a whole list of actors in mind for the various roles, but for Don Corleone, he was determined to get the best of the best. He considered other big names like Ernest Borgnine and Richard Conte, but in the end, it was Brando who stood out. Even the author of the book, Mario Puzo, had imagined Brando as the Don while writing it. But Paramount executives were stubborn. They even told Coppola, "As long as I'm president of this studio, Marlon Brando will not be in this picture, and I will no longer allow you to discuss it." It was a real showdown between the director and the studio, with Brando's career hanging in the balance. The studio finally gave in and allowed Coppola to cast Brando as Don Corleone, but with some conditions. Brando had to take a much lower salary than usual, cover any delays caused by his behavior, and do a screen test. This was a big deal, as Brando was a huge star and didn't usually have to audition. But Brando surprised everyone. He agreed to the screen test and even did his own makeup, using cotton balls to puff out his cheeks. Coppola was worried that Brando might be too young for the role, but he was blown away by Brando's transformation into the aging mafia boss. The studio executives were equally impressed, with one even asking, "Who is this old guinea?" Brando signed on for a measly $50,000, but he also got a percentage of the film's profits. Little did he know that this deal would end up costing him millions. He later sold his percentage back to the studio for a quick $100,000 because he needed money. If he had held on to it, he would have made a fortune. During filming, Brando was on his best behavior, maybe because he was working with a talented cast that included Al Pacino, Robert Duvall, James Caan, and Diane Keaton. They all looked up to him, and he acted like the head of the family, just like in the movie. The film was a massive success, and Brando's performance as Don Corleone was hailed as a masterpiece. He won the Oscar for Best Actor, but he shocked everyone by refusing to accept it. Instead, he sent a Native American actress named Sachin Littlefeather to the ceremony to decline the award on his behalf. Littlefeather gave a speech criticizing Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans and highlighting the ongoing protests at Wounded Knee. It was a bold and controversial move, but it showed that Brando was more than just an actor. He was a man who used his platform to speak out against injustice. Hot on the heels of The Godfather, Brando starred in another controversial film, Last Tango in Paris, 1972. He played Paul, a heartbroken American widower who starts a secret affair with a young Parisian woman. The movie was filled with intense and graphic scenes, including a controversial one where Paul assaults his lover with butter. People were outraged, and rumors flew that the scene wasn't consensual. But both Brando and the actress, Maria Schneider, said the act was just pretend. Brando, always a rebel, didn't even bother memorizing his lines for many scenes. Instead, he scribbled them on cue cards and stuck them all over the set. This drove the director, Bernardo Bertolucci, crazy because he had to make sure the cards didn't show up in the movie. Despite the controversy, the movie was a hit, and Brando earned a whopping $3 million from it. He was even nominated for another Oscar, his 7th. But the movie also caused a rift between Brando and Bertolucci. They didn't speak for years afterward. Bertolucci said Brando was like a monster as an actor but a darling as a person. Brando, on the other hand, was upset that Bertolucci had pushed him to reveal so much of himself in the role. He continued to choose roles based on his personal interests, even if they weren't blockbusters. One of these roles was in The Missouri Breaks, 1976, where he played a quirky, cross-dressing hitman alongside his friend Jack Nicholson. The critics weren't kind to the movie or Brando's performance, but Brando still felt a connection to the character's rebellious spirit. In 1978, he voiced Superman's dad in Superman, but it was a brief role, and he only agreed to do it for the hefty paycheck. He even filmed scenes for the sequel, but when the producers wouldn't pay him the same amount, he refused to let them use the footage. He was a man who knew his worth. Brando also made a rare TV appearance in the miniseries Roots, The Next Generations, where he played a white supremacist. He even won an Emmy for his performance, showing he could still deliver powerful acting, even on the small screen. In 1979, he starred in Francis Ford Coppola's war epic Apocalypse Now as Colonel Kurtz, a crazy American officer who went rogue in Vietnam. The filming was a total disaster, with bad weather, Brando showing up overweight, and one of the actors having a heart attack. But despite all the chaos, the movie was a critical success, and Brando's performance was unforgettable. Later in his career, Brando continued to act in a mix of critically acclaimed and poorly received films. He even tried his hand at writing a novel called Fan Tan, which was published after his death. Brando's career was a wild ride, full of ups and downs, but his talent and impact on the film industry are undeniable. In the 1970s and beyond, Brando's personal life and his ever-changing weight became more talked about than his acting. He'd put on a lot of weight and was dealing with health issues like diabetes. He'd always struggled with his weight, but it got worse as he got older. People also whispered about his reputation for being difficult on set, not wanting to learn his lines, and making strange demands. But Brando wasn't just an actor. He was a bit of an inventor, too. He had several patents to his name, all related to drumheads. It's funny to think of this tough guy actor tinkering with musical instruments. But his eccentric behavior didn't stop there. He was known for being unpredictable, and even his assistant quit because of it. He also liked to sketch and make art in his spare time. In 2004, Brando did something unexpected. He voiced a female character in an animated movie called Big Bug Man. It was his last role, and he played Mrs. Sour, a grumpy old lady. He was always up for a challenge. Brando was also good friends with Michael Jackson and would often spend weeks at a time at his Neverland Ranch. He even starred in Jackson's music video for You Rock My World and appeared at his 30th anniversary concerts. Their friendship was a unique bond between two icons from different worlds. Unfortunately, Brando's health continued to decline. He was hospitalized with pneumonia in 2001 and struggled with breathing problems. But even in his later years, he kept working. He was collaborating with a director on a new project called Brando and Brando, and he was actively involved in developing the script until just a week before his death. On July 1, 2004, the curtain fell on Marlon Brando's incredible life. He passed away from respiratory failure at the UCLA Medical Center, leaving behind a legacy as one of Hollywood's greatest actors. At first, his lawyer kept the cause of death a secret, but it was later revealed that he also suffered from diabetes and liver cancer. Despite his failing health, Brando's dedication to his craft never wavered. Shortly before his death, he even recorded his voice for The Godfather, the game, reprising his iconic role as Don Vito Corleone. Due to his poor health, he could only manage one line, but it was included in the game as a tribute to the legendary actor. His friend and frequent co-star Karl Malden shared a touching story about a phone call he received from Brando just before his death. Brando was distressed and told Malden he kept falling down. Malden wanted to rush over, but Brando insisted there was no point. Just 3 weeks later, Brando was gone. It was a heartbreaking end to a friendship that had spanned decades. In his final moments, Brando made a brave decision. He refused to have tubes inserted into his lungs to prolong his life, choosing instead to embrace his fate. After his death, his ashes were mixed with those of his childhood best friend, Wally Cox, and scattered in two places dear to him, the beautiful island of Tahiti and the stark landscape of Death Valley. It was a fitting farewell for a man who lived life on his own terms, leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire and captivate audiences around the world.